done by all the Farms.com staff. If you would stand up, because I don't know if anybody watched the last 2 weeks, the work of setting up tables, the work of keeping track of data, the work of doing and the emails every day. So if the staff could stand up, that'd be really great, because this is just unbelievable the amount of work that's done. It's just really okay, your turn.
Yeah, well, I'd also like to thank all the scouts. We do really appreciate all the work and all the fields we went into. We looked at a lot of corn. I think we're in the 350s, 360 on corn samples, 280 fields of beans. So lots of data, lots of fields year in, year out, so we can compare across the board, so we can kind of, let's say we're not the same as, we're only picking the best fields. Well, we go to a lot of the same farms, so we can be pretty confident in our data. So the big thing for this year is the rainfall, right? Everyone knows we've got tons of rain in July here, and we had a pretty good later in June, but we had a really good start. We were nice and dry. You can see on the chart we're behind last year and behind the average in May, and even the beginning of June we were hot and dry. So the corn came up really even, other than the fields that obviously went into shallow. We did see a lot of that on tour, some uneven ears, but even the late emergers showed some pretty good yield potential. But above average rainfall here, and thanks to Win, we got that data up on the screen here for you, and you can see like a great, pollination window and later grain fill period here for the corn. The east, similar, maybe more closer to normal, but they also had a really good start. This is the first year that I can remember where pretty much across Canada, including the West, we planted all in the same 1 week window. It was an amazing planting season. We were so dry so early, which was great for planting, and it did translate to some big yields. Heat units, that's been the talk of everyone on tour. Are we ahead? Are we behind? I think we're probably a little bit behind. The southern region is more on track. I went out this week and there's a ton of den out there, so 30 days till black layer. We're kind of on pace. The northern counties we're a little more concerned about, maybe 5 to 10 days behind in maturity, so we're gonna need the first week of October for a big yield. But the crop looks really good. It's super healthy, it's super clean. There is tar spot in some counties, Steve, Lambton, Middlesex, Elgin, Norfolk, Chatham-Kent, Essex, but we're pretty happy. A lot of our farmers are using fungicides, so really clean looking canopies. We got a really good crop that can pump some big kernels for our corn, some grain fill. So we've got May, June, and July up here on the west. We're near normal. We are behind last year, and I think August is really where we slipped on maturity. But if we look at, our guys doing fungicide, we were pretty close to normal. That last week of July, first week of August, we were putting fungicide on. So I think we're on pace, but we are a little bit concerned. But let's hope that the forecast is right next week. A lot of 30-degree weather. That's going to be exactly what we ordered for a big corn crop. East, similar story in the heat unit department. Here's our May to July precip. Again, we are really good on pretty good precipitation, lots of moisture, so that wasn't lacking this year. And our May, we had a lot of heat in April, so we took that out of the equation, and we look at that, we were closer to normal. So what did we see on tour? Steve, if you got any things?
Yeah, just the only thing is when you look at the heat cycle, but the one thing when I look at the rain cycle, sometimes it shows you your May, June, July. But I think where we struggled was we got a lot of rain, but it didn't happen until the last week of May. So even when you get a monthly report, it's like, that's fine, but if I get all my rain in the last 3 days, it actually changes. We had to go such a dry spell along the way. And I think too, when we look at the heat, it's interesting how we measure that heat, but I think we all say, when we saw the smoke roll in, and that's a little bit we talked about, I know there was days that was in the 25, 26, and you felt like you could burn yourself up outside. So basically your whole light rays are all changing, and they're deflecting differently. They're changing how they hit the crops. So even so, when we look at some of the things towards the numbers, some things that I was concerned about was, you look at your planting date, and then you back that up to your emergence date. And I think it's important to see that when we had all that heat in August, and we talked a little bit about that through the tour today, but we still come back to when did we get that crop out of the ground? And that's going to be the time that's different. So you can plant on May 8th 3 years in a row, and you can actually lose anywhere between 3 and 7 days, either too cold, the ground's too dry, and that's one thing that's going to show, even though we're showing the heat, because it's almost, when we're walking fields starting on the 13th and 14th of August looking at crops, I'm amazed at how far they've come in the last basically 2.5 weeks, but yet they're still struggling. And partly was that, we saw the emergence was behind, and I know that pollination, we really lagged behind. We had like a lot, it seemed like there's a lot of silk coming out, and yet we weren't getting those tassels. I mean, this corn's like 15, 16 feet tall, it wasn't seen to unwrap. So we got a little late germination, all of a sudden, poof, you got 4 days in the spring, for 3 days of pollination, we're 7 days behind. And so I think that even helps us understand that, you know, I don't see the harvesters running around yet. We are a long ways of getting away from juice, so we do have some time to go. But yeah, during the tour, I think that we saw variation. I think one of the neatest things I saw was when I was down actually in the Ottawa Valley going like, wow, their corn's ahead of ours. Right, and that was 2 weeks ago. Yeah, so that showed as well too, eh?
The east was definitely ahead. I think that was the first area we really found dent in, like overall in a few fields. The east is pretty much on, I mean, maybe a little bit behind, but pretty much on track, I would almost say. And, you know, the northern counties in Ontario here where we're probably the most behind.
Risk there.
For sure.
Yep.
So what did we see? You know, we saw really big corn. I think at the end of the day, we saw records in a lot of ways. You know, our girth, 17.1 kernel rows round versus 2021's record at 16.9 kernel rows round. So we added 0.2 kernel rows. You look at some of these years and you go, wow, they're long years too. We also had a record in length. We went to 34.7 kernels versus 34.1 in 2021. The only thing left up to chance is our population, and I guess Greg did a really good job in the past pounding it into you because we got a record population this year too at 30,474 plants on average versus 30,450 in 2021. So we've got all the components to make a record crop this year. So we did a really good job, and we did a great job as farmers in Ontario getting the plants out there, getting them out of the ground, and really putting all the pieces together for some big yields thanks to pretty favorable weather. You know, here, Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry, the East really pulled its weight this year. You'll see that when we release the numbers by county and area. The East has a really good crop. Really uniform out there, pretty amazing crop across the counties in Eastern Ontario. Haldeman, Norfolk. Mo looked at this field, yeah, what a field, smoking corn, some 264. I actually had to go through some of the data. There were a few fields that counted over 300. Yeah, not sure, but there is some really big corn out there this year. Lots of 20s, 22 rows round, really good ear length and great population, and you know, these numbers show it, right? This is another one from Haldeman. This is back home close to me, not my corn, but neighbors. You know, you can see we planted end of May, and we had really tough emergence. We didn't get into moisture, and this is what, you know, Steve's talking about. You got these late years that, I don't know, that's not gonna make it, right? So we'll see what happens in those fields, but the big years, you know, 80% of the crop was up on time. It'll be fine, and it counted really well. So even the tougher fields, the uneven fields, the late emergers look good. As long as they finish, they'll be really strong yielding fields. You know, just another, all we looked at is really strong girth, really strong length on these ears, and a lot of ears in the fields. So beans, I'm gonna let Steve take it away on our bean story.
Yeah, I just finished up with the corn too, and I think the one thing we have to watch is when we're gonna start looking at building in test weight, we're gonna start building in quality, and these 2-ear cobs, you know, plus some of the, you know, basically late germinating seeds. Yeah, it's pretty tough to figure out when to spray your fungicide, right? And I know that we have to keep an eye on these later cobs. You know, they do have the tendency to throw your test weight down across your field, but also be careful with the disease levels. You want to watch them as well. I know I look back in the old days when I was about 10 years old, if I had a little extra sucker on tobacco, we pulled it off. And some days you'd think it'd be nice not to have some of those extra ears in some cases, but the corn plant thought it could, and it's like a little train, so it's going to do its thing. Soybeans, yeah, I hate soybeans. I started growing in my first field, so let's see, now 1980 was my first field of beans. So how many people can grow on beans longer than that? Probably a lot of you, right? And so tell me, what's your best yielding beans? They're not this high, are they? Yeah. And it's always the same thing. I remember, like 1980 maple arrows like this, and they would leave 45 to get your wheat in. Then we go to Hodgson's, they got this big in 55. Then we started growing and I'm going to advertise now, growing seed from King Grain, and I grew those KG60s, and so we're up into 60 bushels at the end of the 80s, right? And they're little, short, ugly, scabby guys, and they're awesome. We walked some beans here, they were chest high, and there's 2 fists between each set of pods. 48 bushel, and they're like this tall. They just always want to mess your head around, eh? But we had some good yields looking through the beans. We're counting, so I looked along, and we've got some 63s coming off, and the neat thing is, the better field you walk into, you get a 48, another one you come back to small. And one thing I'm really liking, I don't know, again, I'm looking at some of these newer varieties, and they're starting to get those little bushy, they're a little more uneven. I like ugly bean fields. They seem to yield better than the really nice ones, right? One thing we want to look at when we're looking in the east versus the west, I think we need to really consider this as a thing. When the further east you go, you don't just go east, you go north, right? In the sunlight, we're seeing light that's different. We get up north, light gives us a chance to grow more vegetation. Some of those things will throw us off. But as we look through the thing, the beans are coming along good. We got some really neat clusters out there as we go forward. I'll let you click that ahead. Here's the thing that I just love to see, right? Going across, and like I said last week, we went to Chesterville, and it was like, there was a sign of one variety, a sign of another variety, and there was no sign on this field here, and it was solid brown across the top. These things just come to haunt you, right? This white mold comes back, some of the sudden deaths coming back, and it's just starting to, basically rear its ugly head now when you look around. Again, beans are great. If you don't ground truth, you're gonna have a great crop. You get a chance to walk in them, you might be a little more frustrated, and this stuff doesn't stop, right? So it's still on its way, kicking a lot of the yield out of these potential of beans. So again, if we can turn this heat on, it's the same thing as corn. We still have to finish this crop. We found that we're filling some pods higher up, but I'm still on the verge of saying, man, this was a crop that should be potentially has a yield that's over the moon. And we're gonna come in with a good yield. But I just think that there's some things left behind here, so, yep. Again, the pod count, we're down a little bit, 2,000. I'm a strong believer. I think we did some variable rate beans not that long ago, and some of the best things we did was actually, okay, I'm not a seed dealer, so we're about 100,000 and are good, then 140,000. Like I just watch when I walk fields sometimes, I'm going like, the more we push them, the more we actually get potential. Different than corn, I'm not so sure. Corn doesn't get a chance to take advantage of the space. Beans seem to, so that's a personal preference. I'm looking at when you actually, even if we have some plant counts that are coming down, doesn't mean that we beat up our yields that much because the varieties are allowing us to fill out and let them basically branch out and do their thing. So.
Yeah, so here's a bit more corn pictures. I think the biggest thing, I looked through a lot of the 2021 pictures, and we were finding dent on tour, not a ton of dent, and I think that's what we're trying to show here. I do think the corn crop is a little behind 2021, but it's right in, not perfectly in line, but it's in line, and the kernel depth was kind of hard to tell on tour because we weren't at dent yet, but as I've been walking fields this week specifically, I'm looking at these kernels going, ooh, we got some really big kernels out there. We could really even surprise ourselves, if we do get this September that maybe they're forecasting some heat, some really good sunny days, we might just have even more upside on corn than we think we do, which is really exciting, right? With the bean story, I think it is hard, right? The mold just starting to set in. We got wafer pods. I talked to some guys in the north and beans just started turning all of a sudden. These cold nights, yeah, the beans are gonna be interesting where they really shake out at the end of the day, but the corn, I have a lot of faith in this crop.
I think too, it comes back to, that was a really cool full moon last night. boy, I'm glad we're getting on the other side of that. So we get past that, the sun came up this morning, I thought we're feeling good, but you know when you actually get 28, 29, 30 degree temperatures and you follow them up with 18 to 20 at night, corn loves it. You get 28 degrees and you follow up with 5 degrees in the morning, corn actually has to figure that out. And beans are no different, and you know what that happens when they got like 5, 7, 8 degrees last night? They already figured it out. We gotta go ripe or we're gonna die. So guess what, they're on their way. So I mean, that's just another thing. You think we can mess with nature? It's pretty much a step ahead of us.
So yeah, I think at the end of the day, the final numbers are all gonna depend on what our actual kernels per bushel are, right? And that's where, you know, we work with the numbers and we look at years past and we try to make a good decision on our kernel weight, and that's how we come up with our, you know, our final yields. And beans no different. We look at the pod count, we look at the plant count, and if we do get this good finish, we're in for a really awesome crop of corn. So I think without further ado, the next slide is our big yield announcement.
So remember, if I get 300 and you look at the yield, then you get 100, right? Okay, let's see what it is.
So, new record crop of corn. We're calling it a 203 across the board in Ontario. Who thinks the crop's got that potential?
Yep.
Oh, it's pretty unanimous. I mean, we checked a lot of Maizex fields, so it might be higher, but I don't know. So we're pretty excited. I mean, the one thing I really would like to point out is the East really pulled some really big weight this year. Ottawa and Stormont, Dundas and Glengarry counties had really high yields. The Southeast on corn, Haldimand, Niagara, Norfolk, Oxford pulling really good yields this year. You know, the Southwest still solid, but you know, they had their ups and downs from too much rain. And the North, the crop looks great. The question is, can we get it to finish? So this year we used an 89,000 kernel per bushel divisor. In 2021, the crop was an 86.5 according to the data. So we did shrink the kernel size to account for the weather, and that's how we came up with that yield on the corn. Now, Steve, I don't know if you want to comment on the beans here. So
I think more the soybeans, you can see that we've been able to really hold our own in the east as well, that 55.9. And I think the biggest pullback when I watched how many beans had to be replanted down actually, you know, in the Southwest. I think they really struggled getting one on the ground. There's a lot of replants going on there. That just beats up, right, when that happens. But overall, I just looked across and then thinking that bean yield is definitely very achievable. And I think that, again, it's going to be a big mindset of what does the weather give us in the next little while here to try to finish those top pods off. And if we can stay a little drier and just slow some of the mold down, that's going to help us get to where we're going to be. But these are pretty amazing, and I think when you look at how we farm in Ontario and how intensively we have to farm in Ontario to deal with even against the 3I states in Ohio and that, and we just continue to perform, and I think that you should be very, very honored and proud of what you perform here in such a beautiful province. I mean, I can think of nowhere else I'd like to live and actually be involved in agriculture than right here where home is. Although I go across Canada, I'm still partial.
So yeah, counties here, right? Oxford will be a new record at 224 were predicted, so that was a big one. Some really big numbers in the east as well, some 207s I think out there. Yeah, really big yields across the board. We're really excited about the corn crop and the beans. That's how we got to these big records, right? Like with these numbers, there's tons of counties breaking potential records, right? And I think that's what we have to, I can list them all off. There's probably 10 or 11 counties we're predicting records for both crops in. So we have to remember, if we're gonna get there, we need some of these counties to hit really hard, and it looks like they're gonna do their job for us.
Yeah, and I think when you look at yields, yield is a picture in time. It's just like a lot of things, like a tissue sample. It's a picture in time. The most important thing we can do, though, I believe, is when you can walk across your field, get out there and look and see what you have. Because it's not really what we have for this year, it's lessons we can learn to improve on for next year that are really what really matter. So if you get a chance to get in your field, walk along, check on your plant count, your stand, uniformities and things like that, see where your cobs stand. That's where I think I learned the most. The numbers are the numbers. Each farm's gonna have their own results. But I think it's time to look and say, how can we better for next year and move forward on what we've done? So I think there's a couple more slides. Don't forget the frost light this time.
Yeah, so here's our record corn counties versus 21. Obviously, you can see a lot of them, you know, the east and the southeast really pulling their weight. Huron County, Chatham, Kent, you know, our big corn producing counties need to pull the weight or we're not going to get to those numbers. And being similar story, some really big numbers out there versus 21. Yeah, I mean, they have to be that good or we're not going to get where we're going. So we'll see how we all shake out. I mean, the big bear in the room is a frost, but yeah, we got through the full moon. The next one's September 30. So if we can get through that, then we're looking at October freeze. And if we got an October freeze, I think, wow, these numbers are totally doable, right? So,
yeah. So this, Mo put this presentation together for us. So this is what Mo promised. So I'm just saying this is him. So I see 2.5 to 3 months for frost by me. Perfect. I think that's pushing it, but that's okay, we'll do that. So anyway, I just want to thank all my staff, especially for all the work they did, all the staff, again, with Maizex, the people, the fields, it's pretty neat. The amount of time, you may not think that it's much, but it's a huge effort that they do to put this together. And thanks, Mo, for having us as part of the program and your staff.
Thanks all, we really do appreciate it.
Well, before you guys go, we might have some questions for you. Any questions for the guys? Yes, sir, in the back.
So the only thing I did when I was pulling some last night again, I just love pulling corn cobs. That way we can get the yield down, right? Oh yeah. You said, do you find any mold in the corn as of yet? So the only thing I found last night was I actually found a few western bean cutworms in the still. One I had to squish because it's still alive, so he didn't eat enough corn yet. But as far as overall, I haven't seen, personally I didn't see a lot of issues. The only thing I know is that immature cob has the potential to be nasty if we don't keep this good weather up. That's one thing I do believe. Go ahead.
Yeah, I did see a little bit of mold yesterday. It's related to cutworm again. It's a bullet hole in the side and we were going pink. I haven't seen any direct silk channel infection mold yet. So we'll watch out for that. I mean, we were humid at pollination, so I mean, it's possible. Though, you know, the big kicker in the room is, you know, those second years. I had a question about that today. Man, I hate second years. They love getting jib. So yeah, watch those. But for now, knock on wood, we look okay. But a lot can change really quick with mold, and we all know that. We all had that fun experience in the past, right? So let's not do that again.
The only thing that I am noticing when it comes to actually plant health is I believe that the smoke actually, and we had Dan Quinn with us last week, and we talked about smoke, and he did a little blog on it this week, which is pretty cool. And it talks about, you know, knowing that probably the smoke didn't really, we had super yields in wheat, we had unbelievable sweet pea yields, so it's like, okay, so that messed up the theory that smoke messes you up. But it can cool the area so that we don't get stressed out with drought so much. We have to be careful because it can create a little more ozone that actually poisons and hurts the plant. But when I'm actually walking through, and I think all the guys, ask the guys that walk through the field, and there's some plants snapping off pretty quick. And I've cut them open, so when you actually have that smoke and you slow photosynthesis in a plant, the plant is going to start cannibalizing itself for energy, and it will do it way early. So if you get a chance, cut a few open, because I've seen some really doty, the stalks themselves, it looks pretty big, it's 48,000 feet tall, so let's just not get a windstorm that's really drastic, because I think it may get brittle, and to finish off, it may still grab more out of that stalk. So that's where I would see, I'm more concerned with the stalk strength, the little black spots behind some of the stalks or the leaf stalks, just make sure you pay attention. It's not a crop, like if I said I'm gonna leave it out there to gain 3 points in drying and I get it in November, I'm gonna say I'm gonna put it through the dryer. My own personal opinion.
That western big cutworm, was that more of an eastern Ontario or western?
It was right here.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, it was in Maizex too. Now let's talk about that too. Yeah.
My question is about corn disease, tar spot. Did you see any? I didn't see any.
I found it yesterday. I saw some yesterday in Norfolk. I mean, it's in Essex, it's in Chatham, it's in Kent, it's in Lambton, it's in Elgin and Middlesex, and it's probably in Haldimand and Niagara if I really want to go
Just the
find
lake,
it.
eh?
Yeah, lake. I think humidity, right? Wherever you're worried about dawn, you should be worried about tar spot. Pretty much, wherever, we're getting tons of white mold, same kind of weather patterns are going to give us tar spot. So tar spot, real risk, and it is starting to move. I think why we didn't see it on Tourmo, a ton of fields get fungicide now, and we're just starting to lose activity this week, and I'm seeing it in a lot of those fields that we went back to, and there's just a few spots here and there. So I know even some progressive growers, talking to some guys around the country, they're going to go out, run some second pass strips on fungicide and see what it does. I mean, the data's still out on that, right? We haven't had a ton of tar spot. Is it actually economical, I think is the question. Will it give you more yield? Probably. Will it give you enough yield to pay for your time? I don't know. I mean, they've done it in the Midwest, and it's not a slam dunk by any means.
And I think last year we already saw plants that had tar spot. They were really breaking down a lot faster already. So we're looking at crops. They're really green right now. And that's another thing, I'll throw that out. If we were to get a small frost, I've never seen this kind of rank corn plant. I don't know how the frost would ever knock these things off without a major freeze. So I think we're in pretty good stead right now, and it's keeping the heat in there. So
Is the tar spot as bad as the white mold?
I don't have enough experience to see how much it rips out of the yield. I looked last year and we had a variety that was actually, and we sprayed this on my farms, and actually our yield was phenomenal. I saw some fields that were showing it early. I think there was probably a little bit. White mold is a whole different animal to me, because it's just, if it wants to be nasty, it can just like